Now there's one more element of a typical span that we want to pay close attention to, and that's back at the beginning of the span where we see the dot. That dot is very important in Flash because we do a lot with it. It's called a keyframe. And as we can see, every single span starts with a keyframe. The keyframe is where we control everything in Flash. If I make any changes to any one of my elements, it's going to be at that keyframe. Let's see how that works. I'm going to move my playhead back here so that I can see my camera icon. And if you click on it, you'll notice I can select it. What gets selected up in the timeline is the entire span. And if I make any changes to this, just simply moving it over here to the middle of the screen, what I've done is I've made that change at the keyframe. So when we look at the components of a span, the keyframe sets up the element inside that timeline, and the rest of the span simply keeps it on the screen for that entire duration. If we move the playhead back and forth, you can see it's not moving around. It's sitting right at that fixed position because we modified the keyframe right at the beginning. Since we're trying to use our timeline for more than just duration, we actually want to be able to move things around. And right now, that's basically going to mean we're going to need another keyframe. We can add keyframes wherever we want, just like we can add frames wherever we want. Let's take our camera icon layer, for instance. I'm going to click out here at frame 5. That's going to move my playhead and select that one frame in the camera icon layer. Now, if I wanted to make any kind of change to my camera, I could insert a keyframe, and that would give me the ability to change it right here instead of back at frame 1 at the original keyframe. To make a new keyframe, I can go up to the Insert menu, go down to Timeline, right where we did frames, and you can see Keyframe is right below it. When we insert a keyframe, we get a new dot, so it's pretty easy to see when you've made one. Let me also point out that it's divided my span up. I basically have a span that consists of the first 4 frames. The beginning keyframe, all the frames in between, and of course the square indicates the last frame of that span. And you can see I have another span out here, going up to frame 10. When we add a new keyframe, what we're doing is we're duplicating whatever the last keyframe was. So I basically have 2 identical cameras here, but they're still independent of one another. If I grab the second one, and I just grab the camera on the stage and make any kind of change to it, it'll be recorded in that keyframe. So let's just move it over a little bit. I'll click on the camera, drag it over here, and we've changed that keyframe. If we go back up to our timeline, we can move the playhead back and see that the first keyframe is right back where we left it in its original position, but the second keyframe has the new moved position right there. And we can see that this keyframe is actually independent of the first. The 2 spans that these represent also are independent of one another. If I were to click my cursor in the middle of the first span, and I just press my F5 key, remember that's going to insert a keyframe for me, watch what happens to the second span. It simply gets shoved over by 1 frame. I can do the same thing in the second span. I can even grab the box at the end, remember that's a Control keyboard shortcut on the PC and Command on the Mac, and I can move the end of that last span around to change it. We can also move keyframes. If I grab this keyframe that we created, I'm going to select it first, let go of the mouse, and then go back to the selected keyframe and move it. One thing that you see there is that the end of the last span is kind of stuck to the beginning of this one. And that's generally the way our keyframes and our frame spans are going to work. Keyframes are going to be very important to animating inside of Flash. So while we're at it, let's take a look at the keyboard shortcut we can use to insert a keyframe whenever we need one. I'm going to go down here a couple frames past the last one, select a frame. Now last time we went to the Insert menu for this, but if you remember the keyboard shortcut for inserting a frame, F5, it won't be too hard to remember the keyboard shortcut for inserting a keyframe, which is F6. I'll press F6, and you can see that that created a brand new keyframe right where I had my selection cursor, and it broke that last span into 2 brand new separate spans.